Now that wasn't the last award, that was the second to last award, because this year the judging panel decided that they needed to make one more award. So I would like to welcome back Jason Ryan, the chair of tonight's judging panel, to present a special award for the last award of 2016. Thank you, Jason.
So we don't always do this, but this year we thought it was appropriate. There is a special award to recognise the long-standing and consistent work of one of New Zealand's foremost contributors to open source. This Kiwi, who currently lives in Germany but grew up in Christchurch and was educated at the University of Canterbury, has spent much of his professional life working in an area that is critical to the success of open source projects, but is all too rarely acknowledged. He has worked at the Linux Foundation, been a writer and editor at LWN, and published a book on Linux programming that is generally regarded as the definitive work in its field. Most significantly, however, he has since 2000 been a major contributor to the Linux Man Pages project, authoring or co-authoring over 1/3 of the more than 1,000 man pages currently in the repository, and along the way testing and providing design review for many new Linux APIs. In 2004, he became the project maintainer, and since then he's overseen over 170 releases and considerably raised the profile of the project within the Linux kernel and C library communities. Documentation is one of those topics that evokes a gamut of opinions and emotions, but it can safely be said that no one ever considered it sexy or glamorous. The work of documenting Linux system calls and library functions even more so. But for developers, maintainers, packagers and contributors, that documentation is essential to their ability to be able to do their jobs. So, in 2016, the New Zealand Open Source Awards would like to formally acknowledge the tremendous contribution that Michael Kerisk has made to the open source community. Michael possesses the rare gift of deep technical knowledge and the ability to communicate that clearly and succinctly. His predominantly volunteer efforts over the last 16 years have added considerable impetus to the success of open source and its continued growth and adoption. Ladies and gentlemen, the 2016 New Zealand Open Source Awards Special Prize winner, Michael Kerisk.
Kia ora and good evening. I was back in New Zealand a few months ago when I happened to catch a program on Radio New Zealand that I really enjoyed. It was about the interpretation of the Māori whakatauki, Moia he tangata ringa o raupa, or in English, marry a man with calloused hands. There are various interpretations of this saying, one of which I particularly like, which is more or less, value the man who works hard and contributes to the community. And I should add in passing, there's a similar whakatauki for women also. I think the reason this whakatauki resonates for me is because one of the things I've always appreciated about New Zealand is there's a strong culture of generosity and contribution. It's quite a good fit for working in the world of open source software, I find. My path in that world has been slightly unusual because, as well as programming, I also like deeply understanding things and explaining them to myself and to other people. I often joke, and it's not completely a joke, that one of the reasons I try to write so carefully and thoroughly is because I know I'm dumb. I know that even if I work very hard to understand something now, if I leave it for a few months and come back to it, I'm likely to have forgotten some key details. So I better make sure that I write those details down very carefully so that I can save myself a lot of hard work in the future. A happy side effect of this is that the writing I do turns out to be useful to other people as well. I saw the text of Jason's award speech in advance and noticed that he points out that many people don't consider writing documentation sexy or glamorous. I want to offer a counter-argument. Writing about a topic is an excellent way of deeply understanding it, because you can't write well about it unless you've done a lot of study and testing of what you're writing about. And producing good documentation is an excellent way of ensuring the long-term health of an open source project such as the Linux kernel. And very many people notice and appreciate the results of such work. So by now I'm quite well known in the Linux kernel community, and I've even made a minor career, albeit not a money-making one, of going to Linux conferences to talk about the perspectives that my work gives me. I think there's a little bit of glamour there. And I'm not the only person in an open source project managing to pull off this kind of trick. So I'd encourage people to rethink their ideas about documentation a little, and perhaps consider contributing to a project in that way. Of course, I'm aware that I probably talked up the value of documentation a little bit too much, because it's true that probably most people consider code the most glamorous way of contributing to an open source project. So with that in mind, I'd just like to conclude by saying thank you for this award that recognises a different type of contribution. E noho rā. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.